Hello Internet, and welcome to this companion video to the one I uploaded earlier. This is a kind of suggestion as to two possible routes you can take on an American road trip. I have chosen a route in the southwest and one in the east just to get a bit of, difference between the various things. There can be added or subtracted days to this depending on what you want to see, but both of them are somewhere between 14 to 18 days in the original planning, so you'll have time to see whatever there is to see in the given areas. So, yeah, enjoy. The first trip I want to talk about is one we can call California and Arizona Desert Trip. It starts and ends in Los Angeles, basically, again, because for Europeans that's fairly easy to get to. Probably the same for people in America. If you don't want to spend time in Los Angeles, maybe starting it out in Phoenix, Arizona might be easier, or hell, even in Las Vegas and driving it perhaps the other way around. However, the suggestion I'm making is beginning in Los Angeles. I'm not going to speak much about Los Angeles, but of course, you can start out with as many days there as you find interesting to see the town. Leaving Los Angeles, you should take Interstate Highway 10 heading east. Then, after about perhaps 50 miles on the motorway, when you get to the town of Indio, you can switch south on California Road 86. Just before doing that, you can take maybe a little trip north to the Joshua Tree National Park, one of the absolute most favorite national parks in the West from people I have met. But turning south, you will pass down by the salt lake, the Salton Sea. You can leave the road and go all the way down to the lake, where there is supposed to be very pretty and a lot of things to do near the lakeside. It is basically placed right above the San Andreas Fault, so there is that. The trip itself will end in Yuma, the border town with Mexico and the warmest city in America, with more than 120 degrees from time to time during the summer. There, of course, is the old famous prison in use during the latter years of the 19th century, and one of things you simply just have to see when you're in that area. So take about a day for that trip, or maybe two if you also want to visit the Joshua Tree Park. The next trip will take you from Yuma to Tucson, Arizona. Now, friends of mine in Arizona have described Tucson as the arse end of nowhere, and there is a point to it. However, there is stuff to see in Yuma. General advice, though, in these particular areas, the temperature is hot, drink a lot of water, and the sun is very powerful. Please wear incredibly powerful sunscreen, or you probably will regret it. Outside Tucson, on both sides of the town, in fact, is the famous Saguaro National Park, where, well, it's a desert national park where you can see the various saguaro cacti, or just desert landscapes in all their glory. Saguaros can grow up to 6 meters tall and are an impressive sight. These are also the ones that turn up in numerous Western movies, even if those particular Westerns don't necessarily happen in the, shall we say, southwestern area. However, the parks are very interesting, especially if you can manage to get there while the cacti is in bloom. That is a really pretty sight. Depending on your likeness for cacti, either the same day or perhaps the next, you can then go to the Pima Air and Space Museum, one of the largest aircraft museums in America, and probably, in fact, in the world, including, as you can see in the picture, I'm using the SR-71 Blackbird. In my opinion, the most pretty plane anyone has ever developed. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of planes and stuff from the space program, etc. If you want to know more, take a look at the 5 places to see video I did, particularly on Pima Air and Space. But that is certainly worth a visit if you are in the area. The next trip will be a round trip back to Tucson. More specifically, you will be going down to the old famous western town of Tombstone. This was where Wyatt Earp and his friend fought the cowboys in the most famous actual duel in the history of the Wild West, namely the gunfight at the OK Corral. You can see the old OK Corral, and the center of the town has been more or less made into a kind of a living museum kind of thing. Just be aware it is a tourist trap. Prices are a bit high. However, it's certainly worth to go and see it, if nothing else, I hear, for the absolute hilarity of the sort of community theater reenactment of the gunfight itself. Also in Tombstone is the old Boot Hill graveyard that is actually a historical remnant from the time where the Tombstone area was an actual sort of real lawless mining town, and many people there are still buried, and of course the dead men from the OK Corral gun fight is also interred there. Once you're done with Tucson, having seen all the town has to offer, which can take almost half a day or more, you can drive around the surrounding areas, look at the deserts. Particularly, my advice is perhaps to go down to Bisbee, a bit south of Tombstone, if nothing else than just to see the huge open-air copper mine they had down there. A really amazing sight. At the end of the day, you can then drive back to Tucson, for another night there. The next stage will take you from Tucson in Arizona up to a town called Williams further north. Take the I-10 from Tucson back to Phoenix, then change to the I-17 north to Flagstaff. About a bit north of Tucson, however, take a small break at the town of Camp Verde. Take a short detour and follow the signs to Montezuma Castle. Now, that place has very little to do with the Aztec king Montezuma, except for the name. They thought he might have escaped to that or something, which he didn't. But it's a very good example of the rock dwellings that a lot of the southwestern Native Americans used to live in the early parts of the last millennium. Return to the highway, then follow it north to Flagstaff and turn off to follow the smaller roads to Williams. Williams itself is a fairly interesting old town held in sort of a style of how a small American town would have been in the 50s and 60s, again for tourists of course. Have the trip not been too long, or if you want to add an extra day, Williams is only about 60 miles from the Grand Canyon, so you can either take a day trip up there or perhaps just a small stint. There's actually a train going there from Williams to the Grand Canyon and back again, so you can take that and possibly have a few hours up there. To the best of my knowledge from people who live there, sometime that train also stages train robberies, etc. for extra excitement. The next stage will take you from Williams to Las Vegas, and of course I'm not going to say much about Las Vegas. Anyone will know about it, and you can add as many days there as you particularly want. However, the trip from Williams to Las Vegas is somewhat interesting in and of itself, because take the I-40 east from Williams till you hit the town of Seligman, then turn off the highway and follow the stretch from Seligman to Kingman of the old historic Route 66. This is actually one of the, is not the sort of best kept areas of the old Route 66 that haven't been paved over or mostly just forgotten by time. The old Burma Shave commercial signs are still there. You will drive through some fairly interesting native reservations if that's a thing for you. There are also various other things you can see over that particular part of the Grand Canyon, and of course, just knowing that you have been driving on the Route 66 is interesting in and of itself. Eventually, as I said, you will get to Las Vegas, and I will not tell you what to see there. I'm sure anyone can figure that out by themselves. Leaving Las Vegas, take the I-95 north. The trip is a bit longer, actually, than it would have been on some of the smaller roads, but for once, the highway is not just a better road, it's actually a bit more interesting. Follow it to the small town of Beatty. However, on the way, take a quick stop at Amargosa Valley, another small town in the area. First of all, it borders the famous Area 51, which is, of course, a thing in and of itself, but also because of that, there is the Area 51 Alien Center, which is a kind of these are the UFO conspiracy people's latest ideas, and there is also, of course, the Area 51 alien brothel. I haven't been in there, but I have seen it from the outside, and if that, sort of appeals to you, there is something you can do about it. Anyway, take the Nevada Road 374 from Beatty, which will eventually become California Road 190 after you cross the state border, and go into Death Valley. Now, there are plenty to see in Death Valley, and you can live several places inside the actual national park, though, of course, as always, it will be cheaper to find a place just outside it. However, there are plenty of things to see in Death Valley. There is the Badwater Basin, one of the hottest and the lowest single part of the United States, almost 300 feet below sea level. You can go to the Racetrack Playa, which is a sort of dried up lake where large rocks are apparently moving across the old seabed under their own power, etc., etc. There are plenty of stuff to see in Death Valley, though of course I can not emphasize again how much you need to drink. Leave Death Valley by the southern route and keep going until you hit the I-15 near the town of Shoshone. Follow I-15 to the west and keep an eye on the exits. Not because you need to get off, but because, as my picture show, at exit 23 is probably the road with the weirdest name in the entire American area. Sussex. Don't go there. All there is in Sussex is apparently an abandoned movie studio, but at least the name is amusing. Keep going west until you hit Barstow. Barstow is a good place to take sort of a last stop and also visit the Calico Ghost Town right outside it. An old silver mining town that at its peak had about 10,000 inhabitants but are now completely uninhabited. After that, it is a short stint back to Los Angeles, where you can, of course, add more days to the trip, or just go home to wherever you need to go. Well, there was the first one, and I will now move on from that. The second trip suggestion I want to talk about is basically the famous and very, very beautiful Blue Ridge Parkway in its entirety. I will start this trip at Washington, at Dulles, because that's where I would fly into, but of course, those who have other ideas or those who live in America can, well, do whatever pleases them, to be perfectly honest. The first stint will be from Washington down to the town of Charlottesville. Now, you mostly could just start taking the highway and the interstate highway at the early part of it. However, once you reach Front Royal, my advice is to turn off and go into the Shenandoah National Park, where lies the about, say, a bit over 100-mile long Skyline Drive, or Shenandoah Skyline Drive, which is a fairly long road. It is a toll road, however, be aware of that, but it runs completely on the sort of top of a small line of mountains with a magnificent view out over the Shenandoah Valley. It is one of the most amazing driving roads I have seen in the United States. It is, however, it does take a while to drive it, so possibly divide the trip to Charlottesville into two. While on the skyline, you will start seeing turn-off signs to something called Luray Caverns, and I suggest you turn off and watch that. Luray is one of the many cave complexes in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's certainly worth a visit if you like caves, or at least, stalagmite caves and anything else. There is a place you can stay there if you want to, but mostly just go there to see it. It is a very interesting cave, including even a organ cave where a stalactite had been turned into a musical organ. From the Luray, go back to Skyline Drive and head south to the Rockfish Gap. From there, you can take the trip down to Charlottesville and stay for the night. Near Charlottesville was also Thomas Jefferson's own plantation, Monticello, if you have any interest in visiting that part of the historical tour. The next stage will take you from Charlottesville to Roanoke. However, you should go back a bit from Charlottesville to Rockfish Gap, where the Skyline Drive ended, because there begins the northern part of the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is sort of the whole point of this particular trip. You should just basically keep taking that one down until you reach Roanoke. There are plenty to see during whatever you want to take off. There are various, waterfalls you can go and see and so on. And also, of course, is the natural bridge when you reach that area. You can watch my specific 5 places to see video where I talk about Natural Bridge if you want to know more, but it is certainly worth a visit. Again, this trip is planned for the summer, because very big parts of the Blue Ridge Parkway can be closed in the winter due to snowfall, so be aware of that when you start doing plannings. Again, continuing south, there's plenty to see, like an old crash B-25 bomber, or some various interesting mountain top views, and so on and so on. It's also in this particular area that the famous, or perhaps infamous, Beale treasure is rumored to be buried. I might get back to the Beale treasure sometime, but otherwise you can look it up on Wikipedia or wherever if you want to try to be treasure hunters. When you reach Roanoke, due to the number of things to see and the low speed limit on the Blue Ridge Parkway, it's probably time for some dinner and some sleep. The next stage will take you from Roanoke to Boone in North Carolina. Now, Boone is the largest city east of the Mississippi with more than 10,000 inhabitants above 1,000 meters. Very interesting. However, what I suggest is that you actually stay for a while in Boone and go around to see stuff, because there is a lot of to see in this particular area. There is part of the old areas where the shall we say, old bootleggers hung out, those that will later start the NASCAR series. There are various, again, waterfalls. There is the Blowing Rock, as pictured here, where the wind always blows up from the bottom of the cliff, which in the winter can lead to interesting situations of snow actually blowing upwards due to the powerful winds. There are also various interesting cemeteries and old cabins and so on to see. So there are many things to see on a day or two in and around Boone. The next stage will take you from Boone to Asheville in southern western North Carolina. However, considering again that you will keep going on the Blue Ridge Parkway and with all the stuff there is to see, I suggest taking it in 2 stages with perhaps a stopover in Morganton. Again, there are so many things to see on the way. There are the famous lights on Brown Mountain. There are the Lincoln Viaduct, where they built around the mountain rather than through it. There are the Mile High Bridge. There are the amusement park at the top of Grandfather Mountain. There are just the stunning mountain vistas of the Blue Ridge Parkway. If you happen to go during the autumn colors are absolutely spectacular. Probably the most beautiful ones I have ever seen in my life. There are small towns it can be interesting to pot around with, and of course, if you have followed Daddy Sage's Tom Dooley videos, this is also the area where you will sort of get a chance on this particular stage to see that, particularly from Boone to Morganton, where a quick detour to the areas surrounding Wilkesboro, where Tom Dooley actually lived, will be an easy thing to do. After that, you can perhaps visit Biltmore House, which is the largest private house in America. More than 250 rooms in Biltmore House, and well, you can pay to get in to see it. It is rather expensive, but it might be worth a shot. Anyway, eventually you will reach Asheville and get ready to take the last stage to Cherokee. Cherokee I have described before in some of my 5 places to see videos along with my road trip diary, so I'm not going to make much of that. Again, go visit the local museum and the Okanalufti living museum outside the town. Also, perhaps watch the community theater regarding the tribal history. It's all very interesting. This is where the Blue Ridge Parkway ends, so this is where the trip will end. But you can use Cherokee as a base to go around and watch a lot of interesting stuff in the southern Appalachians and into Tennessee. Also, should you have that interest, there is the Harrah's Casino in Cherokee, so you can end the trip with a little gambling should you feel so inclined. After that, it's time to get back to Washington and hand in your rental car. My suggestion is just take the highway all the way up there, the interstate. It is a fairly long run, almost about 500 miles, but it can easily be done in a day, especially if there's 2 people to shift stints. On its way, though, you can break up the trip by a stay in Lexington, in Virginia, where there's a lot of things to see. For instance, the old Washington and Lee University that both George Washington and Robert E. Lee had connections to, the Virginia Military Institute, churches, and, of course, the tombs for both Robert E. Lee and Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Well, that finishes that trip. Well, that was it. I hope you found these particular trips interesting, or at least gave you some idea of what you might want to do on a road trip. These 2 videos will probably be the last really big road trip videos I'm going to do in a while. I want to get back to actually doing some history. I'm going to keep doing road trip diaries, but for now we're going to do history for a while. But yeah, I hope these inspired you, and until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.